Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Lipstick and Lore. Roll the intro. Today, I'm going to be your tour guide in the spooky, strange, unsolved, conspiratorial, and historical stories that plague my mind and now have to plague yours. Also, don't mention the lighting, okay? I do use the sun in my desk lamp, and it is cloudy outside, so the desk lamp is extra bright. It's just the spotlight. I'm just a star, truly. But today's case is that of Cabin 28, which in fact was turned into a movie. So if you've seen that, you might think you know this case, but I had actually never heard of it until doing research for another case and then stumbled on a whole rabbit hole and was very intrigued. So I am going to cover the true story behind that movie, which I've heard was very good. So if you haven't seen it, you should go watch it. Not only that, but it is based on a true story, and I think movies are just cooler when they're based on a true story. So, without further ado, I'm going to get into today's case. Whew. Once again, handing it right back over to voice over me. Now, I've tried to fill this voiceover like 12 million bajillion times, and it hasn't gone well, so I'm hoping that this time is the time that it will go well. Hopefully. A girl can hope, because goodness, I'm tired of talking. Actually, I'm not. I'm never tired of talking. I could yap for literal days and never run out of something to say. But today's case is that of Cabin 28, aka the Keddie Cabin Murders, which, let me tell you, say that 10 times fast. Keddie Cabins. That really sent me for a loop, and I really had to sit there with that and try to pronounce it because my goodness gracious, I could not get Keddie Cabins. I'll get it right, I promise. This case takes place the night of April 11th, 1981 in Keddie, California. Once again, Keddie, California. Too many sounds. It's really like it's tripping me up. It's tripping me up. And this case is not only one that I had never ever heard about, but I also couldn't find many YouTube videos on it. Like, typically, do you guys hear that plane? I'm so sorry. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's being aggressive. I live by an airport, okay? It's not by an airport, but like close to an airport. So I'm sorry about that. But today's case, like, it's one that I couldn't find many YouTube videos on. Like, I looked and there's a handful of them, but there wasn't, like, typically when you look up a true crime case, there's like if you look up Ted Bundy, like there's hundreds and thousands of YouTube videos on Ted Bundy. But this one, it was like, here's a YouTube video and here's a YouTube video and like here's a podcast episode. And I was like, why is nobody talking about this? Because this case is legitimately one that I read it and like I've consumed a lot of true crime and it's probably the top. Like if you looked at my YouTube recommended, like it's true crime, true crime, true crime, true crime, true crime, dog video. Like that's what it is. And I had never come across this before, but also I've seen so much that a lot of times these cases, like when they talk about the crime scenes and that, it doesn't really like hit me. This one hit me. This one really hit me. So I really hope you guys enjoy this. Like, not enjoy, because it's not, obviously, you don't enjoy true crime, but like, find it as interesting as I did. The first person you need to be aware about is Glenna Susan Sharp, which, by the way, side note, Glenna, love that name. Never heard of a Glenna, but let me tell you, love it. Her friends and family called her Sue, so that's what I'm going to call her throughout this case. So Glenna Susan Sharp, aka Sue. Sue is our mother in this story. And she's the mother of 5 kids, which, my goodness gracious, couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine. I, 0 kids, but I am also an only child. Couldn't imagine having 5 kids. That's like crazy. And she rented Cabin 28 in the small community of Keddie, California. She and her 5 children had been living in the cabin since November of 1980, so roughly about a year at this point they'd been living in this cabin. Her and her 5 children moved all the way from Connecticut to be closer to her brother Don after a divorce from her husband James. So she was married, and I believe all the children have the same father. And they moved from Connecticut all the way to California, which, if you aren't from the US, that's like across the country. So that's a pretty big move, especially to do one on your own, two with 5 kids, because like that's a lot of stuff piled up into a moving van and a car and all that. Like I give this woman props because I take a road trip with just 2 people and I overpack, so I can't imagine like packing up all my belongings and literally moving halfway across the country. So round of applause to her. I also couldn't get a perfectly clear answer on why they got divorced, but some sources I found did say that, like, her husband James was not a great guy, and he might have been a little, like, I don't want to say abusive, but just not a good guy. Like, I heard there was a lot of fighting and a lot of, like, yelling and stuff like that. So I don't know if he was abusive, and I don't want to claim anybody being abusive because that's a serious allegation. But from what I saw and read, he didn't seem like a great guy, and I think that's why they got divorced. But don't, like, 100% quote me on that. And I'll link all my sources down below in the pinned comment, and then also the description if you want to go ahead and look there. So, like, just do your own research, but I'm pretty sure he just was, like, not a very good guy and was sort of, like, aggressive, and I think that's why she divorced him. Now, the Keddie cabins were listed as resort cabins, but I say resort very loosely because by the time Sue and her 5 children had moved into the cabins, they were already pretty run down and in desperate need of a bunch of repairs. Sue had a few part time jobs in the nearby town of Quincy, California, and she relied heavily on her welfare checks to make ends meet. It's been alleged that she wasn't a neglectful parent, but definitely was absent due to having worked so many jobs just to keep, food and make sure her children had everything they need. So she wasn't neglectful and she wasn't a bad mom. She was just insanely busy, and also being a single parent and trying to provide for 5 kids, like, that's got to be hard. So she was working. I think one source said like 3 jobs, I believe is what she had. So she had like a morning one, like nighttime one, and then she had like sort of a freelance thing going on that she was doing. So that's a lot. So she wasn't around at like home during the day. Like, she'd drop the kids off and pick them up from school, but as much as being around like during the day or at home, she really wasn't. So the kids kind of had to learn how to take care of each other, which some people said made her a bad mom, but I don't think that made her a bad mom. I just think necessarily she was doing her best with what she had. An example of Sue being a good mom was one time she told one of her friends that she'd see to it that her children had winter clothes, even if that meant she had to go without. So I think that really just shows that Sue was willing to do absolutely whatever she could to make sure that her children had everything they needed and were taken care of. So once again, I think she was just busy. Like, she was just doing her best to put food on the table. So she wasn't there, but when she was there, she was taking excellent care of her children. Now, getting into her children, her oldest son, John, who some sources said he was 15, some said he was 16. I'm going to go with probably closer to 16 just because that's what more sources said. So that's what I'm going to go with. So John Smart was 16, and he was considered to be a little full of himself, a bit cocky, but he's also a teenage boy. So I was like, what teenage boy isn't kind of full of himself and cocky? Like, I don't know. I'm not a teenage boy, but I've known enough teenage boys to know that they're all just a little bit, kind of cocky, kind of full of themselves. Not in a bad way, not in a bad way. They just have this confidence about them that I don't, normal people don't have. It's just a teenage boy thing, in my opinion. And his best friend was, I think it's Dana. I'm gonna be honest with you. I looked it up. I could not figure it out. It's Dana, and it is a dude, and I think it's Dana. I've just never heard a dude with the name Dana. Maybe that's just me being ignorant, but I don't. That's what I'm gonna call him. Okay, sorry if that's not how you say it. Dana Wingate, 17 years old, is John's best friend and has a bit of a troubled past, ending up as a ward of the state, as well as being on probation in 1981. I couldn't find out why he was on probation, but I assume it was like a typical juvenile crime. Like, I don't think he was a hardened criminal. I think he was probably like drinking or something like that. And both boys were said to have enjoyed parties and girls and going out, so I would assume he was on probation for like some typical teenage crime. I mean, not that crime's good, but teenagers will do teenager things. And then was her daughter Tina Sharp, who is 12 years old, and she was described as a shy girl with a rather private like life. And she had these secret hiding places she would go and to be away from everybody and to sort of be with her thoughts. She had only a few close friends and overall was considered a typical 12-year-old girl. So, nothing super of note there, but just a typical 12-year-old girl. Tina was just doing her thing, okay? Tina was just doing her thing. And then there was Sheila, who was 14, so Sheila Sharp, which, once again, the S sounds too, the C sounds, the S sounds, they're getting me, okay? Sheila Sharp, 14 years old. Couldn't find a whole lot of info about her and who she was as a person, but from what I could find, she was described as like a typical teenage girl, and she was also described as the responsible. And then Sue had two younger children who were Rick, who was 10, and then Greg, who was 5. And there really is no information about them. I think because they were so young at the time that there just isn't anything of note or like anything, like reporters didn't report on it. Also, like, I don't want to say they're not important to the story because they are, but they kind of aren't super big players in the story, so I think that's why there wasn't a whole lot written about them in the sources that I had. Now, despite moving literally halfway across the country, the children seem to be doing pretty well despite everything, and that they were reported to have been making friends and settling in, and the family was said to be overall unproblematic. They didn't cause trouble. They sort of just kept to themselves, went about their lives. So there was no reason to think that anybody would want to hurt this family or that they were in any sort of trouble with anyone. They were just your typical single mom family, just all doing their thing. Teenage boys are, hanging out and partying. The daughter like is hanging out with friends. The younger boys, are being younger boys. Sue's working her jobs. Like nothing of note. Nothing to really say like, oh, this is they're this or they're that and this is why this happened, and just nothing to insinuate that they had any enemies or people who wanted to hurt them, which makes this case even like crazier in my mind because so around 10 p.m. April 11th, 1981, Sue and Tina returned home from a neighbor's cabin. Her other daughter Sheila was staying overnight with a different friend. Tina had also asked her mother if she could stay at a friend's house, but Sue said that it was too late and she didn't want her 12-year-old out, so she said no, and Tina didn't put up too much of a fuss about this. She just went home with her mother and started getting ready for bed. John and Dana had gone hitchhiking out to the nearby town of Quincy to go to a party before returning later that night. They were said to have returned sometime between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m., and it's believed that they actually walked in on these attacks happening, so investigators thought it was probably closer to 1 a.m., but they couldn't confirm exactly when the boys had gotten home. Also, another thing, I got really stuck on this hitchhiking thing forever, and then I realized it was the 80s and hitchhiking was like normal because I was like, why were they hitchhiking? I was like, isn't that like illegal? And then I realized, oh, this is the 80s and people did hitchhike. And I just, hitchhiking, like, I could do a whole video on just straight hitchhiking and yap about that because hitchhiking fascinates me. Like, hitchhiking culture fascinates me just because it was so normalized, but it was also so dangerous. And I'm sure there's people out there who have so many stories about hitchhiking that are like crazy. And I would love to hear some of those. So if you have a story about hitchhiking, let me know in the comments below because I would be incredibly intrigued to know because it fascinates me. But that's a side tangent. Neighbors near the cabin reported that they had heard muffled screams and groans around 1 or 2 a.m. that night, but they were unsure of exactly where these were coming from, so instead of getting up and going to check them out, they went back to sleep, which honestly, probably me too. Like, I'm nosy, but also if it's late and I hear like a commotion, but it's not right outside my window, I'm probably going back to bed. I'm gonna be honest with you. Even if there's a noise in my house, like if I'm home alone and there's a noise in my house and I'm in my bedroom and it's like in the kitchen, I'm not going out to check personally, you know? Because, like, that's really none of my business at that point. So a lot of people were saying, like, well, why didn't the neighbors go check? And I was like, I wouldn't have checked either. So I don't blame them for not getting up and going. Because, one, they didn't know where it was coming from. And two, it's like 1 a.m. I'm not getting up at 1 a.m. to go check out someone screaming. I'm sorry, I'm just not. The next morning, roughly about 8 a.m., Sheila returned home from her sleepover with her friend. She did find that the door was unlocked, but said this wasn't too unusual because sometimes if her mother knew her or her siblings were coming home, she would leave the door unlocked for them. But what she walked into next was something she couldn't have imagined in her worst nightmares. She walked into a gruesome scene of her mother, her brother, and her brother's best friend tied up, bloodied, and deceased. After seeing this, she didn't go any further into the house and ran to get help. She returned to her friend's cabin to tell her friend's parents about what she saw. The friend's father ran into the house to find the two younger sons, as well as a neighborhood kid who was having a sleepover with them in the house. And instead of taking them downstairs, he removed them through the window because, mind you, this is all on the first story, like it's a one-story area. And he removed them through the window because he didn't want them to see the gruesome scene, because it was said that they were completely untouched and unharmed, like they weren't tied up. It just looked they had woken up and hadn't been into the other room yet. So he didn't want to traumatize them, so he took them through the window, and then the authorities were called and were there within the hour. Now I'm going to try to pronounce some of these like cop names, but it's not going to be pretty, I can tell you that. I'm terrible with names. So, Deputy Hank Clement, I think is how you say it. He was the first one on the scene, and he reported an absolute massacre with blood everywhere on the walls, the bottoms of the victim's shoes, on the bedding, in Tina's room, on the ceiling, on the doors, on the back steps, on Sue's bare feet. He said that this was the most blood he had ever seen. The positions and smearing of the blood suggested to investigators that the victims had been moved and rearranged from the positions that they were killed in. When asked, the investigators said this thing was planned to a certain degree, which will come up later because the police work in this case is terrible. So them saying this and then also having faulty police work just sort of like is an oxymoron. Like they're like, yeah, it's planned. But also we're not going to investigate it like it was planned because it was probably just random. It's like, okay, well, was it planned or was it just some random attack that happened to happen? Like it doesn't, the logic is not strong in these investigators, I'll tell you that much. Now I know that I do put a trigger warning at the beginning of these videos, like on screen, but I'm going to give a verbal one right here that I'm going to describe this crime scene because I think it is important to the case. And it is gruesome, and it is gory, and it's not something that everyone can stomach. It's involves being tied up and bound and things. It's graphic, and it might be upsetting to some people. So if you think you can handle it, continue, but if you can't, go ahead and click off now and like catch me in a different video because this one, researching this one was upsetting, and if you're not in the right headspace, I don't want you to continue. Okay, it's fine. You can catch me in a different video that's going to be a little less gory than this one. You know, look out for yourself first, okay? So John was closest to the front door, face up. His hands were bound with medical tape and bloodied. His throat had been slit completely, and beside him was Dana, who was face down. His head had been badly damaged, and it was thought to be blunt force trauma, possibly with a hammer. He laid partially on a pillow, and he had also been personally strangled. His ankles were bound with electrical wire, and he was also like tied to John. So John and Dana were actually bound together by their ankles, and there was stab marks on the walls, and it was just gruesome. Sue had been covered partially with a yellow blanket on her side, and the mother of five was undressed from the waist down. She was gagged with a bandana in her own underwear, which was secured around her head with medical tape, and she had injuries that suggested she put up one heck of a fight. Like her defensive wounds were there was far too many for this woman to not have put up a fight. It really looks like whoever had attacked her, she definitely fought back. And I think this is, and I try to highlight victims in these cases because I think it, I'm not doing this to bring awareness to the killers. I'm bringing this awareness to the victims because their families and loved ones and people who knew them are the ones who have to suffer with this for the rest of their lives because some sicko decided he wanted to take his anger out or take whatever out on these people. So, Sue putting up this great of a fight, I feel like is important because one, she probably knew that she had other children upstairs that it was her job to protect, and two, just wanting to live and raise her children and be there for her children was also probably a forethought in her mind because she was such a good mother. And this is brought up later, but people were like, well, why does she have all these defensive wounds? And it makes it really hard to figure out like her actual cause of death because all of these defensive wounds. And I was like, listen, if you're getting bludgeoned to death, which is what they believe happened to her, you're gonna fight back. And also, she definitely wanted to fight for her kids. So I just feel like that's important to say because she was such a strong person even up until the end, and she was such a good mother even up until the end. Sue also had the imprint of a .880 pellet gun on the side of her head, and her throat was also cut all the way through, just like her son. So, needless to say, this scene was gruesome and bloody, and something that these small town investigators had relatively never seen. So, it was something that was completely out of the ordinary for the small town of Keddie, California. There were no signs of sexual assault present on any of the victims. This suggests that the motive of the assailants wasn't sexual in nature. All the victims had suffered blunt force trauma with a hammer or hammers found in the home. All sustained multiple stab wounds with a bent steak knife and a butcher's knife that were laid in order next to the victims' bodies. It took police hours to realize that there was another child who wasn't anywhere to be found, a 12-year-old girl, Tina Start. When police finally realized Tina was missing, they quickly called in the FBI, knowing that this situation was not only urgent, but also completely out of their, this was above their pay grade, because nothing like this happened in the small town of Keddie, California. The sheriff at the time, Doug Thomas, and his lieutenant, Don Stay, were not able to find a motive when they investigated the scene because they had ruled out the sexual motive, and the attack looked so very personal that they didn't think it was random, which would later be discounted in an interview that they gave, saying that this might have been just a random attack and it wasn't planned, which contradicts other statements that they made. So it's very confusing. In another press conference, they said that this tragedy was a random act of cruelty, which once again contradicts what they said before when they were saying it was planned and personal. Well, how could it be planned and personal if it was a random act of cruelty? It just really didn't make sense, and they were flip flopping like a fish out of water between their two stories. Is it a random act of cruelty, or was it planned and personal? Please get it together. Furthermore, the family home showed no signs of forced entry. The detectives did in fact recover an unidentified fingerprint from a handrail on the back steps. The cabin's telephone had been left off the hook, and all the lights had been turned off, as well as all the drapes being closed. The three young boys were examined and found to be completely untouched, as well as completely unaware of the massacre. So I don't know if I said it earlier, but there was actually three young boys in the house, and that was Greg, Rick, and a third boy who was a neighbor boy, and his name is Justin, in case I didn't say it earlier. I don't think I did. But Justin is the two boys' friends, and he was sleeping over at the house when this all happened. But all of them seemed to be completely untouched and fine and weren't affected at all whatsoever. All three of them claimed to be completely unaware of what happened in the house that night, which was strange because even the neighbors had said that they heard muffled screams and groaning, which means that if you were in the house, you most definitely heard screaming or groaning. So it just sort of adds another element to the case, as well as if you're gonna kill a whole family, right, and kidnap the one girl, why wouldn't you get rid of the other possible witnesses in the house? If they're killing everyone, why would you leave three people completely unharmed in the house to possibly identify you? But also, them being unaware was weird too, because, what do you mean you didn't hear anything? Your whole family was just murdered. I mean, granted, they are small children, but still, your whole family was just murdered, and, you know nothing? You didn't hear nothing? Not a single sound? What? This was actually discredited in a later interview with Justin, who said that he actually did see something that night. Justin Smart, a 12-year-old boy who is friends with Greg and Ricky, later describes that he saw Sue with two men in the house that night. He described the men, one particularly with a mustache and long hair, and the other one was clean shaven with short hair, and both of them were wearing glasses, and one was allegedly carrying a hammer. Justin then reported that John and Dana entered the home and argued with the men, which resulted in a violent fight. Tina was then allegedly taken out the cabin's back door by one of the men. And I say allegedly because one, I wasn't there and I don't know for sure, and this is just a witness account, and this case has never been solved, so we don't know for sure. And two, because when he's recounting all of this, he's put under hypnosis. And they did this because, and I'll put the little statistic blurb article thing up on the screen. They did this because children who suffer traumatic events, oftentimes their brain will completely block it out because their nervous system can't handle it. And they thought hypnosis would help bring this to the forefront of his brain. And this happens with a lot of children, especially children who suffered terrible child abuse or some sort of super traumatic event. And I'm not saying this is with all children because, I'm sure there's going to be people in the comments like, well, actually, I went through this and that didn't happen to me. Okay, I'm so happy for you that that didn't happen to you. But for some children, their brain will try to protect them and just completely wipe it from their memory because their nervous system, like, it's too scary. Their nervous system just cannot handle it. So they put Justin under hypnosis in hopes that he would, like, his subconscious would come forward with some sort of memory of the night. And apparently it did. If this is all true and not like you just coerced out of him, then I mean that's great, and that's glad that they can do that. But it's still alleged because I don't know if any of that is true. It's just Justin's version of the events. I also couldn't find if they put Greg and Ricky under hypnosis. I feel like they would if they're trying to get answers, but maybe they didn't. I don't know. I couldn't find any reports of it, so I'm gonna go with no. But maybe they did. Don't quote me on that one. There was also allegedly a lot of potential evidence collected at the scene, but due to the case being pre DNA testing, very little of it was helpful and a lot of it had been lost to time as the years passed. Sheriff Thomas enlisted the help of the Sacramento Department of Justice, which this part, which is like the FBI, kind of like it's an FBI branch. This part really, I don't know, confused me because you've got three people murdered and a girl missing, right? That's a lot for a small town. So I understand that they're enlisting like the big guns, but instead of sending the homicide unit, they sent two special agents from the organized crime unit. And this part really got me. I was like, what do you mean the organized crime unit? This is clearly a homicide, a triple homicide at that. And there's a girl who has been kidnapped by the murderers and is probably going to get murdered too. So why would you send organized? This isn't an organized crime. This is a homicide. Like, if they investigated it later down and found that it was an organized crime, that makes sense. But this is literally fresh after they've gotten to the scene. They enlisted the help of the organized crime unit, which just doesn't make sense that they'd send them. And a lot of people thought this was odd because it's a homicide. So this was something that I got stuck on for way too long, and I did a bunch of research and tried to figure out, like, does the FBI do this? Like, do they send organized crime units to homicide scenes? And I could not find like another case that was like, there's other cases where they're homicides but they send the organized crime unit because the dude or the person who was murdered was like a part of, a drug syndicate, or they thought that the suspect was part of a crime syndicate. But this one's like they've literally stumbled upon the scene, don't know who did it. At least that's what they're claiming, that they don't know who did it. They don't have any suspects or any motive. And they're like, these three people are murdered and there's a girl missing. And I haven't found a case like that where they've sent the organized crime unit. They've only ever sent homicide. So it was really weird to me. I'm sorry. I got stuck on this for way too long. And I feel like it's important to the case because it'll come up later. So just like file that bit of information away in your head for a little bit and we'll come back to it, I promise. So police immediately look at the most likely suspect, which is Sue's ex-husband, but they found that he was in Connecticut at the time. There was absolutely no way he could have been at the murder scene that night. So he was ruled out relatively quickly. After this, they decided to look at the surrounding area and the people who lived around the Sharp home. And the main suspect they could come up with was Justin Smart's father, which they lived in cabin 26, which wasn't that far from the family home. And Justin Smart had been known to hang out with the younger boys. So let's talk a little bit about Justin's father, Martin Smart, or Mr. Smart, as I might refer to him as. And he had a house guest at the time who was an ex convict named Bo, or I'm going to butcher this, Bodaby. I, Listen, I read that, I looked it up. Bodaby. I feel like that's probably how you pronounce it. Don't know. But we're going to call him Bo because that's what all the sources called him. And he was known to have connections to organized crime in the area as well as in Chicago. And this is a side note, but that may be why they sent the organized crime unit instead of the homicide unit. It still doesn't make sense because it's still a homicide, and obviously you want the homicide investigators to investigate it. But it comes up a little bit later in one of the theories that we're going to talk about. But Bo was definitely involved with organized crime and drug syndicates, so that could be why the FBI sent the organized crime unit. Now, the investigative work on these two men is just a hot mess, and honestly, it's just a lot of bits and pieces and things. And if you're anything like me, you're going to listen to all this and get really, really annoyed that these two were not found guilty or not charged with anything, because they've said and done some really weird suspicious stuff. Like the night before the murders, they were both seen at a bar allegedly acting strange. They were dressed in nice suits and walking around nervously, is what witnesses had said. And then Martin Smart later told the police that he had a hammer that matched the one discovered in the house, which is just a weird thing to say if your neighbor's been murdered. Like, I'm sorry, I don't think that would be my first thought. I think if I heard my neighbors were murdered, my first thought would be like, "Oh my god, we need to catch this guy. My son was in that house. Like, what if they come back? What if they try to do something again in this neighborhood?" It wouldn't be, you know, that hammer. That hammer looks a lot like my hammer. You know, I should tell the police. And not only did he tell the police that the one used in the killings looked like his, he also told the police that it had gone missing shortly before the murders, which it like that's just so suspicious to me. Like all I can think of him going up to the police officer, yeah, that hammer looks a lot like mine, but like mine went missing, you know? Like that's such a classic thing. I mean, oh my gosh, who was it? Was it oh, it was Jodi Arias, who she used her grandfather or her grandparents' gun to kill Travis Alexander, and then had reported it missing like the week before she murdered him, and then was like, "Well, I couldn't have used that gun because it went missing in a robbery, and all they stole was the gun." That's what this reminds me of. Because what do you mean? Like, why would that be something you tell the police? Also, later that year, a knife was found in a trash can outside the Keddie General Store, which was believed to also be linked to the murders. So just like a bunch of weird findings going on. This investigative work is so very like scattered. By the way, the knife was turned in and then like sat there for a while, and then later was like the police were like, "Oh, you know, that could be involved in the murders." So I can't confirm or deny if this was like for sure a knife used in the murders, but that's what investigators had said. But honestly, I don't these investigators suck, so I don't know if I trust them that much, but I digress. So, throughout my research, I was really waiting for them to bring up finding Tina, and it wasn't talked about a lot until I found sources from like later on. And this was because they didn't find out what happened to Tina until 3 years later. Like 3 years after these murders, that's when they found Tina. And all I could think is like I didn't really hear much about them. Because when a child goes missing, the first 24 hours they're missing is the most important, because statistically, as the hours go by, it is less and less likely for them to be found alive. Because if there's no ransom given, then it's most likely the kidnappers want to either torment them or just kill them. So the first 24 hours of a child being missing is the most important, and it's why a lot of states have since banned the rule of waiting 48 hours before reporting a child missing, because that's how it used to be. And there is some places where that's still the case. You have to wait 48 hours before you report someone missing. But a lot of police stations have now made it to where if the person is under 18, to report them in the first 24 hours, because those are the most important. So if you didn't know that, the more you know. But 3 years after the Keddie Cabin murders on April 22nd, 1984, someone collecting bottles in the woods of Butte County, roughly 60 miles from the Keddie home, the person found what they believed to be a human skull and reported it immediately. The area in which the remains were found is reportedly very difficult to find and not necessarily a high traffic area. It's a spot called Camp 18, roughly 5 miles from Feather Falls. This led to some speculation that the bottle hunter was tipped off somehow about the remains, but there's no affirmative evidence of this. It's just odd because the area that it's in, it's called a camp, but it's not really a camp. It's somewhere you go if you want to, rough it in the wilderness. But many people don't even go there to do that because there's so many other areas in California and national parks and things you can go to rather than this area. It's just sort of like a wooded area that people don't really frequent or go into. Like, it's not a campground, it's not anything like that. It's just, from what I've read, it's just this wooded area. So the fact that a person was looking for bottles out there is kind of weird because, like, if it's not a high traffic area, there shouldn't be a lot of bottles. But I mean, whatever floats your boat. Okay, whatever floats your boat. After being contacted, law enforcement gathered what they could of Tina's remains. The medical examiner identified Tina's remains through dental records. Before the identification of the remains, the sheriff's department received an anonymous call that said, quote, "I was watching the news, and they were talking about the little girl found up at Feather Falls. I was just wondering if you thought of the murder up in Keddie, in Plums County a couple of years ago, where a 12-year-old girl was never found." End quote. Whoever made the call was never identified because police never investigated it until years down the line, and at that point, call records had been deleted, and all they had was a recording of the call itself. So the person could not be identified, which honestly is sort of annoying. I mean, not completely, because this not too long after the discovery of Tina's remains, Sheriff Thomas had resigned from the investigation. His handling of the case and lack of investigation was considered distasteful at best and corrupt at worst. In an interview from CBS in 2016, Sheila said, quote, "I was told that the suspects were told to get out of town. To me, that means it was covered up." End quote. And this really just shows that there was so much missed evidence, so much missed conduct. There was just so much going on here with the investigation that was simply bad and didn't really do this case justice. And I think that is big in part to why this case was never solved, just because the sheriff at the time was neglectful or downright corrupt. And Sheila seems to agree with this, and she has spoken out quite a few times about this. And a lot of people have given her criticism because she seems more angry than she is sad. But of course, if you never get closure for something like this, I would assume you would be angry instead of just sad. Like, I'm sure there's a part of her that is very sad inside, but also a part of her that is so frustrated and angry about never getting justice for her family being basically massacred. In 2004, the Sharps' home was demolished, taking all of its secrets and evidence and story of the tragedy with it. This, however, would not be the last time we heard of the Keddie Cabin Murders, because this case was reopened in 2013 by Plum Sheriff Greg Hagwood and Special Investigator Mike Gamberg. In 2016, Gamberg located a hammer believed to be one of the murder weapons in a dried up pond. Later on, it's discovered that Marty's wife and mother of Justin had left her husband the day of the murders. Afterwards, she provided Plums County Sheriff's Department with a handwritten letter from her ex-husband. It read, quote, "I've paid the price of your love, and now that I've brought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through. Great. What else do you want?" End quote. This letter was not treated like a confession and was never followed up on, which, when I tell you I read this, I flabbergasted, jaw on the floor, had to pick it up. Because what do you mean that's not treated as a confession? If I got a letter like this, I'd be like, oh, he murdered someone. Like, murderer, killed somebody. I could have not heard about the Keddie Cabin murders and read this and been like, he definitely did it. He definitely killed 4 people. Because what? I've brought you the lives of 4 people? What does that mean? No normal, sane person says that. I'm sorry. No normal, sane person says that. That's weird. Also, this could be a possible motive for the murders because he was angry, and, anger does weird things to people. So maybe. That's alleged. That's just my opinion, okay? But still, this murder was tragic, and then this letter to add on to it just seems suspicious to me. Truly, deeply suspicious. Furthermore, to add insult to injury, the ex-wife admitted in a documentary in 2008 that she thought her ex-husband and Beau did in fact kill the family, which, if that's not the icing on the cake, I don't know what is. So Martin, or Marty Smart, and Beau met in psychiatric unit at the VA in Reno, Nevada. Smart had been diagnosed with PTSD, but some think he was just using this to be provided money from the government. It was also alleged at the time that the sheriff, Doug Thomas, and Marty had been very close pals. People said that they were buddy-buddy, that they would chat and they would drink together, and that they had been seen together on multiple occasions. But Sheriff Doug Thomas denied this statement and basically said that Martin had passed a polygraph test, which means that he was innocent. Which, by the way, polygraph tests aren't even admissible in court. In 2016, Mike Gamber met with a counselor at Reno Veterans Administration. The counselor, who wanted to stay anonymous, told him that in May of 1981, Martin Smart had confessed to killing Sue and Tina Sharp. Sorry, these S's are really tripping me up, guys. I don't know what to tell you about this. Quote, I killed that woman and her daughter, but I didn't have anything to do with the boys. End quote. When DOJ was alerted to this confession in 1981, they dismissed it as hearsay, which, what? This is what I'm going to call the second confession this man has given, and it's been brushed off. If that's not shoddy police work, I don't know what is. Also, just the fact that the counselor took the initiative to report this and then was dismissed must be so disheartening, because I'm sure she'd probably been carrying, or I don't know if it's a she, actually, it could be a dude. I guess I'm just being biased there, my bad. But the counselor probably lived with this guilt for so freaking long, because what do you mean? What do you mean someone sits down in your office and confesses murder to you, and when you report it, nothing's done about it? That would personally eat me alive, like truly, for the rest of my life. And I'm sure she like puts her head, or not she, the counselor puts their head on their pillow and just thinks about that in the back of their brain. Like, I'm sure they have nightmares about that, because what do you mean it's hearsay? Like, I get it, but also I don't get it. I really don't. So now let's get into the theories about this case, which the most widely believed theory is an alleged love triangle between Marty, Marty's wife, and Sue. It was believed that Marty and Sue were having an affair, and that she was supposedly counseling Marty's wife to leave her husband. And then it is alleged that when Marty discovered this, he enlisted Bo to help him kill Sue. Bo was a known mob enforcer and moved into the Smart household only 10 days before. So this is a possible theory, and one that is widely believed amongst sleuths on this case, as well as investigators. This would not only account for why Marty's wife left him, but also why his son and his son's friends were left completely unharmed by the assailants. Another theory that is widely believed is that this was all tied to some bigger plot, something to do with maybe a crime syndicate or drug dealing or something that would involve a police cover up. Gamber claimed that, quote, covered it up. That is the way it sounds, end quote. He believes that the DOJ and the Thomas Run Sheriff's Department were covering up a larger drug smuggling scheme that Martin and Bo were involved in. Marty was a known drug dealer, and Bo was said to have been connected to a crime syndicate in Chicago. This may explain why the FBI sent the organized crime agents instead of the homicide unit. It also could explain why the two had suspects were seemingly told to leave town and disappear. This sort of would lead to a police cover up in the bigger theory here. Really makes sense for some of the little details, especially the FBI organized crime unit, which I got stuck on for far too long. Especially because the sheriff's department literally did nothing. When I tell you, the new investigators came to look at all the evidence that had been collected, and literally none of it was kept properly. A lot of it was lost. None of it was investigated properly. That fingerprint they found, they only had record of it. They didn't have the fingerprint itself, so they couldn't run it against anybody. And they also never fingerprinted Marty or Bo, which is crazy to me. Why would you not fingerprint your two main suspects? Like, that's crazy. And the fact that they were allegedly told to get out of town makes it seem even more suspicious. I want to talk a little bit about my theory really quick before I wrap up this case. And my theory is that personally, there was no love triangle, but I think Sue probably was telling Marty's wife to leave him, because from what I could get from witness accounts is that there was a lot of fighting in between Marty and his wife, and there was a lot of animosity and just like bad vibes, and Sue leaving her husband for what I assumed was similar from what I could find in sources. Sue seemingly left her husband because there was a lot of fighting and he wasn't a great guy. Would makes sense why she went to Marty's wife and basically said, "Hey, you need to leave this guy." Because it was said that Sue had talked to Marty's wife before and that they were friendly with each other. So maybe she saw herself in Marty's wife and decided to sort of tell her friend, like, or her acquaintance, like, "Hey, maybe you should leave this guy." And my theory is that Marty found out about this and decided that he needed to get rid of her. And also, another part of this is like, if Marty's wife knew that she was leaving her husband, maybe that's why Justin was over at Sue's house, because she didn't want Justin to see her leave his dad. So that's my personal theory. And once again, that's all alleged. Okay. I don't have affirmative evidence for that. But I do believe personally that's what happened. That's my theory. That's what I'm going to stand on because that makes the most sense to me. But what do I know? I'm just some goober on the internet, okay? I really truly know nothing. What we do know about this 37-year-old cold case is that it's far from forgotten. As new evidence and theories shine light on what could have happened in Cabin 28, the victims are memorized by their living family members and friends who tell stories about how wonderful they were and how they didn't deserve what they got. While both Martin and Bo are now deceased, investigators don't stop looking for evidence and clues about what could have happened in Cabin 28. New DNA evidence has pointed investigators into thinking of other possible suspects. The new investigators claim, quote, "It's my belief that there were more than two people at the crime scene and involved in the totality of the crime. The disuse of evidence and abduction of the little girl make it seem like there was more perpetrators than just two. This proves that this case is far from over and that investigators will not stop until who is behind them are brought to justice, whether they are deceased or not deceased." And that is all I have for you on today's case. I hope that I covered it in a way that was easy to digest and that made somewhat of sense, minus my nonsensical ramblings in between. And if I missed anything, please let me know down in the comments below, as well as your thoughts and feelings. I am always open to discussion and new case recommendations, so please talk to me in the comments. I made this channel for two reasons. One, to bring awareness to these cases, and two, to have somebody to talk about them with. And that for me is you guys. And this case was tragic and heavy, and so go ahead, go outside, hug your dog, hug a family member, watch some cartoons, bake some cinnamon rolls, I don't know, do something that makes you happy. And once again, be smart, be safe, and be yourself. I hope to see you guys in the next one. I do have playlists of both my lipstick and lore videos, and my just makeup videos if you don't want the heavy stuff, you just want to watch the makeup. I do have makeup tutorials in a playlist called Lipstick and More. I love you guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.